technology. It's very good. Okay, I'm Jairus, as mentioned. I'm with the Mozilla Foundation, and I'm going to talk about internet health. Very exciting. So I work for the Mozilla Foundation, as mentioned. You may know us from Firefox. It's our browser. It's open source. I don't work on the Firefox team, but the kind of relevant thing about Firefox for this is that the Mozilla Corporation has a single shareholder, and it's the Mozilla Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and that's who I work for. So unlike the other major browsers, we don't have shareholders. We're not reliant on delivering stakeholder value or anything like that. All of the work that we do goes back into the nonprofit, which is really to try and make the internet better. And to that end, there's a bit of a manifesto on the Mozilla website, which I won't walk you through, but this kind of shows you a bit of the foundation of the foundation. So these are the things that we look to spend our resources on. These are the reasons that we structure our activities the way we do. And so those activities are a lot more than just the browser. We have fellowships, we do consumer advocacy, we do research grants, we do art grants. Last year we did a campaign called Privacy Not Included, where we took a bunch of IoT in your home objects and either did a security audit or had security experts look at them to kind of ask, what's the worst that could happen? When we started tackling these issues, we realized we were looking at online privacy and security wrong. We were spending our time telling people to install VPNs and use Tor and worry about IoT. And then we did a survey and found most people don't know what those things are. So now we try and look at it both from the policy perspective, like how can we make the policy and regulatory environment better, but also how can we talk to people in a way that they understand about the problems. So this is a review of a connected pet toy where we show the kind of data it stores, the kind of devices it has, and kind of a what can go wrong. And we did this for dozens and dozens of items. We did another one around Christmas. These are my cats. They're not related, but they get jealous if I talk about other cats, and they're not included. So, but yeah. So what we try and do is we try and do things that will enrich the lives of individual human beings at the end of the day, and the way that people use the internet should make their life better. And so as part of this, we build the Internet Health Report, which is about the human experience of the internet. It's independent, it's open source, and it's a compilation of data, research, and stories that show how the internet is evolving across 5 different issues. So we work with researchers, digital rights activists, fellows in our community to try and tell a collaborative story of how the internet is and isn't healthy from a human perspective. And if I'm rushing through this, it's because we're running fast on time, but catch me after and I'll slow down. So we worked with over 200 experts to develop this. And what we're seeing overall is that while the consequences of getting things wrong with the internet could be huge for peace and security, for political and individual freedoms, the problems are never so big that nothing can be done. Because there are more people than you can imagine, working to make the internet better and healthier and applying their skills and creativity and bravery to issues of business, to tech, to activism, policy, regulation, education, everything. The report is not a country-level index. It's not a doomsday clock. Part of the trouble in explaining how to make the internet healthier for people is that a lot of it is unseen. Internet users, we don't think a lot about fiber optic cables under the seas or the men and women who assemble electronic devices. A lot of us don't know how our favorite companies profit or the influence they have on the way we relate to each other. So the report is wide-ranging in that we try and cover a lot of different things, but it isn't 2 minutes to midnight. This is from last year's report, and this is the top 50 passwords among 10 million leaked logins. And this is from a report by WP Engine, and based on the frequency, 16 out of 1,000 passwords could be guessed just by using the top 10. So sometimes we show kind of security data like this, but largely we try and look at it kind of holistically, right? The internet as an ecosystem. In the same way that the environmental movement kind of had to grapple with the fact that, that you can't talk about individual parts of the Earth without realizing that the Earth is a system. And that's a thing we can all rally around. We are looking at the same way. So if we're completely honest about our ecosystem, a lot of us would prefer not to know how healthy or unhealthy it is, because it would mean that we'd have to change a lot of the way we do things. Maybe we'd have to change our email. Maybe we'd have to stop using social networks that we use to stay in touch with friends or family. But we're making choices all the time about what software to use and what risks to take. And the idea is, through this report, we can help inform people both about those choices that they're making, and the people who are doing work in the field, we can give them a bit of a boost and signal boost and resources they can use to do the work. So the internet covers 5 internet health areas: privacy and security, openness, digital inclusion, web literacy, and decentralization. And I'll cover each of these briefly in detail. But we also have 3 spotlight stories that we thought were of particular importance this year around. The first is about AI. It's about the growing need for societies and economies to kind of reckon with the growing ability of machines to learn and make decisions, and making sure, how do we make sure AI prioritizes human needs above others, above profit needs or above efficiency needs. The second story is about the power of cities. And this isn't a smart city story. This is about the untapped power of city governments and civil society to work together to make the internet better for people worldwide. So New York, as an example, we did a local New York internet health report because they were negotiating with Amazon for a number of services that they were buying from Amazon, and they were able to say to Amazon, look, we don't like the way that you do it this way. If you change things, we'll work with you. And Amazon made those changes, and now all the cities who work with Amazon reap the benefits of it. So the power of cities in a kind of collective bargaining and negotiation point of view. And the third spotlight story is about digital ads and rethinking digital ads. Targeted advertising and personal data collection are at the heart of what's wrong with a lot of the internet. So we look at kind of what are the efforts being made to make things right. So those are the 3 spotlights. Of the 5 categories, the first is privacy and security. So kind of the question here is it safe? Can we trust in the systems that are online to protect us? So some of the stories that we look at are data privacy, digital ads, anonymity. But voice recognition technology is lowering barriers to the internet. City planners have access to more data. All of these things that are happening have security implications. And so we're trying to look at what that exposure looks like, whether that exposure is coming along with a commensurate increase of awareness of what our growing vulnerabilities and attack surfaces are. This is 1 day of WannaCry ransom payments. Because you can look at Bitcoin transactions, we can look at all of the transactions that went to the ransom Bitcoin address in a day, and we don't know who's making the payments or who's receiving them, but we can see the trail of money paid. How much money would you pay to get access to your computer files? And the answer for a lot of people is a lot. In the article about this, we interview the victim of a ransomware payment and a ransomware attack, and he said, my first reaction was panic. My second reaction was to get on another computer and figure out exactly how much 2 Bitcoin was worth in US dollars. And because it didn't matter how much it was worth, he needed his data. And so in a lot of these cases, we talk about the larger industry effects, you know, like shipping ports being shut down. But there's also individual people who are struck and attack, and in some cases have devastating impacts from things like this that we try and focus on. So that's first, privacy and security, and the next category is openness. And so how open is it? Openness is one of the foundational pillars of the internet, and when it was made, that openness was highly radical. It was extremely transparent, and it's radical today and just as threatened today as ever. If you go back and you read some of the founding documents of the internet or of internet culture, things like J.P. Barlow's Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, a lot of it seems very, very optimistic and very kind of idealistic. But the reality is now corporations and governments mitigate a lot of our relationships with the internet. So what does it mean to have an open internet? Can we do things like permissionless innovation? What does hate speech look like? What does harassment look like? And how does that impact what an open internet looks like? In Germany, we're a year out from implementation of a law to reduce hate speech online that people were really worried about. And so far, it's neither particularly effective at solving things, nor as restrictive as a lot of people feared. And so we try and look at what are the key points in openness. So this is actress Daisy Ridley. You may recognize her from Star Wars. Except on the left, that's not actually Daisy Ridley. That is what's known as a deep fake, where someone took her face and put it on the video of another actress. And if this video were to continue playing, it would be a pornographic film. So people take the images of celebrities and they fake all kinds of videos with them, usually just for personal gratification. But we're moving into an area where it's going to be harder and harder and harder to trust what we see. And it's especially pressing to educate people working with vulnerable groups and whose work could be negatively affected by deepfake technology, like journalists, human rights advocates, to grapple with it. Because we're in a bad spot. When these videos become more mainstream, people will lose trust in what they say. If a journalist has a video of a politician accepting a bribe, just a deepfake. The negative impact for people doing work who can come under pressure from deepfakes also is huge. Will women journalists or politicians feel comfortable speaking their minds if they know that someone can just release a fake sex tape or a fake extortion tape if they say something controversial? So what do online communities look like when entire demographics don't feel safe to talk? An earlier presentation touched on the same topic as this, but none of these people actually exist. These are all AI-generated people. And if you go to thispersondoesnotexist.com, you will get an AI-generated person. If you hit refresh, you will get another auto-generated person over and over and over. So all of these people are just people I took my browser to, and they were generated. And they're pretty good, right? So with the combination of deepfakes that we looked at earlier, the technology behind something like this, the trust level we have for what we see online is not likely to increase over the next few years. How can you connect with people if you're not sure they exist? And if you look at things like the disinformation campaigns around the 2016 election, there were communities upon communities upon communities of people that were set up by other people that did not exist to build events that were kind of created out of thin air, and this is what's coming, right? It's going to become easier. It's going to become more trivial to make. I would guess within a year or two, you'll be able to make deepfakes on your phone with a phone app, where you just choose a video and choose an image, and that's something we're going to have to reckon with. On the other hand of openness, you've got things like social media taxes, internet taxes. There was a particular social media tax in Uganda, which was implemented in July 2018, which was a daily tax of 200 shillings, which is about 50 cents American, to use apps like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp. After the tax had been in effect for 6 months, the Uganda Communications Commission reported that the national internet usage rates had dropped from 47% to 35%. So these are real things with real impacts. The next category that we kind of look at is digital inclusion. So this is who is welcome? What does it look like when you're online? So things like the Google walkout, how does that impact things? The Amazon demands that Amazon employees were making, how does that impact things? And while mainstream focus on this is often in Silicon Valley, serious harms are happening elsewhere. Factory workers in China, Malaysia, Brazil, other countries are making our phones, our watches, and hardware in conditions that we're not often aware of for pay that is often below what they're expecting. And over 2/3 of female journalists have said that they've been harassed online. So when people get online, it's not enough just to be online. What does that online environment look like for people? And who is online too? So this chart is, if there were 100 people in the world, who would be online? And this is kind of the breakdown of this, because global averages, half the people are online, that's great, but it hides that some world regions have connected more than others. Europe reached 50% access over 10 years before the rest of the world, and they're at 80%. But in Africa, it's 24%. And to really understand the weight of this, consider that more than 80% of the world's population lives in what people call developing countries. So if there were only 100 people living in the world, almost 55, 56 of them would be living in Asia Pacific, and only 26 of those would have internet access. In Africa, you'd have 13 people, of which less than 4 would be online. So that's the reality of half the world is online. It's true, but it's not evenly distributed. And using data from an MLab, which is an open source platform, the Alliance for Affordable Internet report showed that Africa not only has the least affordable internet access in the world, it's also the slowest in the world. The median download speed in Africa was found to be less than 1/7 of that in Europe. So the internet is here, but it is not equally distributed in any way. I'm going to speed through some of this. The next category is web literacy, and this is kind of what do you need to succeed online. We did a partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to do an observatory in Kenya, where it was a study with like blind control groups, where we took a number of cell phones and devices and gave them to people and studied how many skills does someone need to go from not online to online, to be able to use it safely, effectively, and in a way that makes their life better. And the answer is 53. It's a huge amount of skills. You need to know that what a password is. You need to know that your phone password is different than your email password. And that's different from your Google password, which is different from your banking password. And some of the passwords talk to each other, and some don't. And we take a lot of this for granted because we know how phones work, and a lot of us have been using them for years. But a lot of this stuff is not intuitive at all. And when you give it to someone who has not had access to technology, it is very complicated and problematic. Some of the issues that we look at are how the internet can be used to distribute important work. So Amnesty International created a community called the Decoders, which was a community of over 50,000 online volunteers from more than 150 countries who donated their time and skills to support human rights research. So they broke their projects into microtasks, kind of like the Digital Turk, so that anyone with an internet connection can be part of these larger human rights tasks. And the last category is decentralization, so who controls it? The digital world is dominated by 8 American and Chinese companies, and they control basically everything. Their companies and their subsidiaries have oversized control over the internet. They dominate the layers of the digital world, and it's a front-to-back domination in a lot of places as they increasingly control the pipes as well as the software. Google was hit with a $5 billion fine from the European Union last year, but that's pocket change to an organization like Google. And while GDPR looks like it might have some teeth when it comes into effect, right now there aren't really effective controls on these companies. One of the things we looked at is that these companies have so many different products, services, and investments that it's not always clear how these companies make their money. So we looked at these 8 companies, we broke them up into 4 categories, and one of them here is the attention merchants, and these are the ad companies. In 2018, Google and Facebook controlled 84% of the global digital ad market outside China. That is such a massive number. Google's parent company, Alphabet, earns 85% of the revenue from digital ads. And while Baidu owns the top search engine in China, 70% of the market share, Facebook has over 2 billion monthly users, and more than 98.5% of their revenues, $55 billion US, is from ads. They're not a social media company, they're an advertising company. They're a company whose job it is to figure out how to get people on the social media sites to click on their ads. And looking at these numbers, it's a lot easier to imagine, okay, well, what are the motivations of the people making the decisions, and what are they going to prioritize? But it's not about Baidu or Google or any one company. It's about the ecosystem that overall we're dealing with. And so it brings us back to the larger question, how healthy is the internet? And the answer is, it's complicated. There are some places where things are getting better. Access and affordability, there are clear lines that are trending upwards. But in some areas like censorship, online harassment, trust, things are getting much worse. We haven't done a lot of development as a global community on the tension between free speech and harassment. We don't really have good solutions for that. And we need to start thinking creatively about the way that people who make technology, the people who use it, and the people who regulate it can work together to build policy environments, to build digital environments that not just work for them, but work for the people who aren't online yet, and that are working for people who, generally speaking, are not invited to those rooms. And until that happens, it's still going to be for us, by us, instead of for us or by us for everyone. We feel like we can make the internet better. The internet is made by people, it's for people, it impacts people, and we can make it better and build better communities on it. At the end of the day, so much of what we struggle with online are issues of trust. Trust in institutions, relationships, media, government, videos, people. But we can and should embrace the notion that it is possible to make the internet better. It's not a force of nature. It's a tool. It has governments on it. It has corporations on it. It has humans on it. And it belongs to all of us. And the way that we treat each other on it today and the way that we approach these issues today will define what the future looks like for tomorrow, for us, and for everyone else. Thank you. I will take questions if there is time. I didn't think there was, but if anyone has questions, please ask them. We have a mic, I think, over there. Oh, yeah.
Can you just go back to the last slide?
Thank you. I can't control it from here, but if someone can turn the slides back on the TV at the control booth. I'm afraid I can't. No. While that is getting worked out or not, any questions? I do have more photos of my cats on my phone, if anyone is.
Okay, yeah. Can you you made a comment about if the GDPR begins to get some teeth. Could you just expand that a bit, please, because it's important?
Yeah, so one thing that's different about the GDPR compared to basically every other legislation that has come out along this thing is the GDPR fines are not set in dollar amounts. The GDPR fines are set in percentages of the company's annual revenue. Not profits, revenue. So in theory, for some infractions under GDPR, a company can be fined up to 4% of their annual revenue per infraction. So if a company loses the data of 100 people, theoretically, a judgment could be levied against them, which could theoretically, if not severely injure them, put them out of business. So the GDPR is the first legislation that really that scales to the size of companies in this sense. And the GDPR Commission has said, we're not going to start with these tools. We want to start by working with Google and everyone else so that when mistakes are made, if they act in good faith, we'll act in good faith and figure something out. But if they're not going to act in good faith and they're just going to think, oh, well, we'll pay a $2 billion bill as the cost of doing business, they're not going to be able to afford the fines that eventually are going to come out of the GDPR.